Good morning, huddlers. Welcome to the Daily Huddle Thursday edition, Spiritual Matters. I am your host, Dr. Monica Ogando, and I'm so excited about today's conversation. It promises to be a juicy one, and I have a quote to deal with that. The only cure for grief is to grieve by Earl Groveman. We'll be talking today about how grief can accelerate your spiritual journey with our guest, Jinnie Schmid. You know, you can't go wrong with percussion because it is the closest instrument that we have to the heartbeat of the earth. So I always love it when we have that, I love that. That's my inner Prince coming out. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the Daily Huddle. I'm so excited that you are here. As always, we ask a few questions to ground us in the moment. So I'm going to put you on the spot, Stacy.
Good morning.
Good morning. How are you and what are you grateful for?
Good morning. How am I? I am how I say that I am. And actually, both those answers will be tied to. I am feeling very uncomfortable with this topic of discussion. I know there are some things in my life that I need to put to death and grieve in order for me to move forward. So I am feeling uncomfortable and very grateful for this opportunity at the same time.
Sweet. I love that reframe. Awesome. I love that. Thank you for that. So Rel, I know you're not on video, but where are you? We all want to know because we're being nosy. And who are you going to hug today?
I am here.
Oh, there's Giovanni. Okay. Pick up the mantle, Gio. Pick up the mantle.
Hey, Gio.
I know
can't steal that. I am right where I'm supposed to be.
Yes.
And that is here.
Mm-hmm. And who are you hugging today?
I'm going to hug my wife, Susan.
I was going to say, I'm going to hug my wife.
I think we should all go over there, Gio, and go hug Susan. Just pour it on thick. Well, I am so appreciative of everybody coming in to have this amazing discussion. We are in the middle of our summer series of, we're learning about different parts of what can accelerate our spiritual journey. And we've been through it these past few weeks. We've talked about Tantra, we've talked about astrology, we've talked about even the basics of food and, our sexual selves, our sensual selves, etc. And it might seem a little counterintuitive to talk about this one, but to me, it would be lying by omission if we didn't include it. And we have brought an amazing grief expert to talk with us about this, how grief can accelerate your spiritual journey. And we have Jinnie Lee Schmid with us today. Jinnie has experienced about as much change, loss, and grief as anyone can imagine, most of it by the time that she graduated college. But she perfected what she calls Academy Award recovery at an early age and powered her way through a long and successful career as a corporate consultant and entrepreneur. And after the most important person in her life died, she struggled through 9 months of debilitating grief that threatened her business and her marriage. And then she finally discovered the grief recovery method, and her purpose and calling became clear. Now she coaches high-performing women leaders who have too much at stake to stay stuck, helping them to recover from their past, release their grief, and reclaim their freedom to thrive. So welcome, Jinnie. I'm so excited to have you here with us.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here. And do I get to say who I hug? Because I'm sending Stacy a big hug because I love what you're feeling and I love that you're showing up when you're feeling it. And I want to let you know, I just confessed to Monica and Sorrel that I was feeling a burden about this topic too, right? Like this is a heavy topic. And I, coming on and with such a lovely introduction from Monica, I was like, oh my gosh, like a burden to kind of get it right. I don't want to say anything that would not be helpful, so let's be in it together is what I'm saying, right? Like, because the other thing, one of the main things to know about grief is there's no standard process, there's no right or wrong. Same thing with a discussion like this, right? Like nobody's an expert on this. We're all only an expert on our own experience. So bully to all of us for showing up and bringing it. And I'm looking forward to seeing what the conversation brings.
Yeah, me too. Me too. So just for context for all of you listening, Jinnie is familiar with this conversation because she and I have had it offline. But I myself have gone through a harrowing year of losses. We lost about 7 people in my family, and the culmination of that in terms of emotional weight for me was the loss of my father almost a year ago now in October. And my brother died, an uncle died, an aunt died. I mean, like, it was just like one after the other. And then when dad died, I was like, I'm through. Okay. I quit life. I quit y'all. I quit business. I quit everything. I'm going to go sit down somewhere and just be in the fetal position for unlimited amount of time. And it didn't look like that to the outside world. Right? Nobody knew that was the plan that I had. Nobody knew, like, oh, when she gets off the Zoom, she's going to go lay down in the fetal position and cry herself to sleep. Nobody knew that. Right? And so it was great to have that conversation with you, Jinnie, because you helped me to put a lot of things in perspective about how we can hold it and let ourselves feel through it and not be drowned by it.
Yeah. So first of all, you just exemplified my premise, which is that if I drop that phrase Academy Award recovery into my intro, everybody knows what it is, right? Like all of us high performers, high achievers, we've all perfected that even before we had a name for it, right? Like we are winning the award for best performance.
Yeah.
But why don't you also say the quote you found, Monica, because I think that speaks to what you're talking to as well.
The one that I said earlier?
The
only cure?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, the only cure for grief is to grieve, Earl Goldman.
Yeah. So, side by side with even if we feel the need to put on the Academy Award recovery when we have to get up and get dressed and go out in public, what we do when we're in our fetal position and or with trusted professionals and friends is actually do the grieving too, so we can get those emotions out. Sadly, we do have to experience them. But one of my premises about grief, as horrible as it can feel, is, it's part of the human experience.
Mm-hmm.
I want to live my full human experience, right? Like if we deny our challenging emotions and experiences, we're not living the fullest life we had, so that's kind of an intellectual argument, and it doesn't always make it any easier to embrace, but I don't know. I guess you could also go back to that old expression. You can't really experience how high the highs can be if you're not willing to let yourself experience the lows.
Okay, I didn't say it as smart as that, but I just experienced that it's like there've been a lot of sense of loss that doesn't come with this level of grief. And to me, I made the distinction that it was like, okay, this level of grief is only commensurate with the amount of love that there was in that relationship. If I didn't have the amazing relationship that I had with my dad, it wouldn't feel this way. It'd feel like, oh, okay, bye, see you next lifetime or whatever, right? Or when I lose my favorite book, or when Prince died. Oh my God, you guys! When Prince died, I was in a what is it, Smoothie King, waiting for my lunch. I was gonna get a smoothie, and I get the news on the thing. It was like 1 o'clock in the afternoon, Eastern Standard Time. And when it came, I froze and I started crying. And the girl on the counter was like, what happened? I was like, somebody I love died. She was like, oh my God, I have this movie. But it was the fact that I reacted like that to somebody that I had never had a personal relationship with. Yeah. It wasn't about the relationship. It was about the meaning. Yeah. Right? The meaning that this person had in my life. And I think that it's directly proportional to that sense of loss, right? Yeah. One of the things that I love that you say, Jinnie, is also that grief isn't just about death. It's also just a general sense of loss. Like a lot of times we experience grief when we have to move from the house that we've lived in for 30 years or from our childhood home, or when we go back to the childhood home and it's like, it looks different. And now you feel like your childhood went up in smoke or something. And there's a sense of loss in that. Talk to us about that.
Yeah. Well, thank you for bringing that up. The truth is that any change in our life, any life event you can think of, has the potential to cause some grief, because if you think about it, even the changes that we want, that we pursue, that we perceive as being happy, positive changes, there is a little something else you have to say goodbye to. And the best example I have from my life is when I got married. I got married, about 30 seconds before I turned 40. And so there were a million things good about that. I was carrying some of that social burden about, being single at that age or whatever. But in addition to, and I had a fairy tale romance and beautiful wedding and all the wonderful things that go with stepping into marriage. And then I had to deal with, where's my independence going? How am I spending money on other people, not just myself, right? How am I spending time on other people, not just myself? Like, I ended up helping buy my stepchild a car. Like, these were all things that I never really considered before I stepped into that. So there were some things I had to say goodbye to. And so, yes, Monica, thank you for pointing out. And I'll be happy to create a handout to share with you guys. I have a list that blows most people's mind. I think it's a little overwhelming. My list includes about 100 life events. So one thing you can do to evaluate if you're having any grief is take a look at that list and see how many you've experienced, how many maybe you've experienced recently in rapid succession, like Monica's experience, right? Like, because grief is cumulative, and all the stuff you never, got to say about all those changes, you carry around as cumulative grief. So that's a good call out.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I like that you call it a cumulative, because whatever we haven't processed emotionally, it doesn't go anywhere. It stays in our bodies, like The Body Keeps the Score talks about that. I love that book. And somebody, I don't remember who said this originally, it might have been Iyanla, I don't know, but somebody says the issues live in the tissues.
Oh, that's great. Yeah.
And so when we don't process our sense of grief or loss, etc., then it comes out somewhere else. It leaks somewhere else. And why is there such a, as universal as a sense of loss and grief is, why is there such a cultural, like, oh, I can't let you see me in that breakdown state kind of thing that happens in our culture? Why is that, Jinnie?
Girl, I wish I knew. Part of it is generational observing and learning, right? Like, in generations past, probably back to when people began, somebody just decided that we're gonna show the positive and hide the negative, right? And so then that generation's children learned and observed that's how to do it, right? And then it's just been passed down for so many years, I think. That feels like one of those $64 million questions that if we knew the answer to why, we could really bust it open and make $1 million. But I think the thing to know is that those are myths, just how you come to an awareness of how that little voice in your head is not the truth. He's just nagging you with all sorts of lies and hatred towards yourself. Well, let's also just realize that there are myths out in society that are teaching us how to deal with grief that are not true. So for instance, the one that bothers me the most is time heals all wounds. So that's directly opposite to what we just said about grief being cumulative, right? The more it sits there, it time doesn't heal almost anything, right? Time devolves everything. But what happens is a certain amount of time passes, and then we think, oh, I'm the one that's crazy or broken because time didn't heal my wound. I'm the only one that this is happening to. Everybody else has got it all figured out. And I think that's the most insidious. So be aware that time doesn't heal all wounds. Things like keeping busy and being strong, those are not going to bring healing, right? All of those tend to serve to just keep, the word picture I use most often is a pressure cooker, right? Like all that gunk goes in a pressure cooker, and the pressure goes up the more and more stuff we put in. And to your point, if we don't have some kind of release valve that lets out that steam, you might get a leak or you might get an explosion, right? It's going to come out one way or the other.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I recently had the experience of going to a supermarket to go buy some groceries. And as I was leaving, there was this older gentleman, didn't look like my father at all. He was tall, he was white, completely opposite of my father, but he had his gait. And he was walking slow, and kind of like very judiciously trying to find where his car was, and this kind of like deliberateness that older men have that I've come to associate with my father. And I was just watching him, like I slowed myself down to watch him go to his car. I was going to my car too. And there's this song, Giovanni might know the song. It's called Mi Querido Viejo, which means like my dear old man. It's like old. It was released before I was even born, before any of us were born, Jesus. And but as soon as I saw the man get into his car, that song popped into my mind because I have musical Tourette's and it's an incurable condition. And I immediately called my sister and I was like, this just happened. And I like mumbled and cried my way through telling her the story. And just speaking it and having a witness for that moment that just happened for me. Like the guy didn't even know that this was happening, all in my heart, right? So just witnessing that and being witnessed for it helped the moment be as sweet as it was, as bittersweet as it was. And then it was just a moment. I didn't have to carry it for the rest of the day. And that's something that I think sometimes the whole idea of like, get it together, you can't break down in the middle of a Publix parking lot, to just let yourself have the moment is what will help us move through it. Just like the quote says, the only way to cure grief is to grieve.
Yes, that's beautiful. I love that you called, another word picture I use in my work is that it is helpful to say it out loud to a heart with ears and tape over its mouth. So I love that you had a safe person, a living person with ears that could hear what you had to say. It's a little different than, writing a letter and throwing it in the fire or throwing it in a river, right? Like having a living person. One who doesn't talk back and take over the conversation, right? That's important too. You need a chance to just say what you need to say. But I think that's wonderful because as bittersweet as that moment was, like the hard feelings, I think that's a moment you'll kind of treasure as part of the memories of your dad, right? What it brought up about your dad. So that's really to me, that's a sacred experience, which brings us back to our spiritual conversation.
So how can grief accelerate our spiritual journey? How do we use it? How does it, instead of being like this stuck place or stunting place, whatever, how do we use it to move us forward in our spiritual journey?
Love it. So I'm glad you asked that because I did want to be sure to drop a few things that came to mind when I actually sat and thought about this, including a really tangible experience I had with a client of mine that I think might be a good illustration. But first, one of the things I wanted to share is two things I believe about grief that tap into the spiritual side. Number one, actually, okay, I can't take credit for this. This one I got out of the movie called Inside Out. Do you remember this little character named Sadness? So one of the great aha moments in that movie was that grief lets people know we're hurting and invites them to come help us feel better, right? Like if we show that we're hurting, other people who love us want to come take care of us and they want to contribute to us. So to me, the answer to the question you just asked, how can we allow grief to be part of our spiritual journey? I think the openness to allow it to be part of our spiritual journey is the first step, just being willing for that to be the case. And I think part of that willingness is being willing to show it to our loved ones, our safe people, so that they can come help us. Because I mean, our comrades, our loved ones, the people we experience on this earth, I think are part of our spiritual growth. And so let them come play a role in your life.
That's amazing. I like the idea of just, being present to that, right? It's just because a lot of times, I mean, I'm just saying it's so common for us to just swipe things under the rug. Is it swipe or push things under the rug? And to be able to just say, this is what's happening, and to access that our sense of loss accesses empathy from somebody else. It's kind of like this dance of emotions.
Well, and if you think about it, if you believe that myth that says I have to be strong for myself and I have to show others that I'm strong, number one, you're denying yourself some of your own emotions and experiences if you just won't go there. But number two, as I said, people want to contribute. And if we go around all the time saying, I'm fine, I don't need anything from you, we haven't given them an opportunity to contribute. So we're denying them something, just like we're denying ourselves something.
Yeah. I really love that. So then what are some of the ways in which we can get the support that we need as we're grieving?
Well, so that's kind of a way we can open the door to the human support. I want to talk about kind of the spiritual support too. And one caveat I want to say is that I came into thinking about this conversation from my spiritual perspective, which is I'm a Christian. And so I want to say, I don't have any idea, but I'd love to hear if there's anyone here from other faith traditions, right? Like there are a million faith traditions. There's people who believe in, like I believe in one personal God, but there are other people who believe in a number of gods or no gods or nature as God, right? So I don't presume to understand how it impacts spirituality from any of those other traditions. But again, hopefully we can have that part of that conversation, or at least start it here today. But from the Christian perspective, another thing we believe about grief is that the grief and the hard times are what turn us back to God, right? Like when everything's going great in our own lives, we don't need God really, right? Like, so unless we mess up big time and feel we have a sin to confess and repent, that's one thing that draws us to God. But the other thing that draws us back to God is knowing that our hearts are broken. We don't see how we can survive through it. And so oftentimes that will turn people, if they have a faith tradition that's like a faith in a personal God, that's one thing that draws us back. And I think the beauty of God, as I understand him, is he doesn't get frustrated the way we would with a little child who doesn't call often enough, right? Like he's thrilled and ecstatic anytime something happens that makes us go, oh, wait, I can turn back to God. So I think that's something I think about when I think about grief and spirituality.
Well, what about folks who say that their grief actually makes them question their relationship or even the existence of God?
I'm so glad you said that. That is a really common situation. And again, I mean, I think the nature of your faith and your spirituality helps define what might happen next, right? So for instance, a Christian who doesn't believe they have a right to be mad at God or question God, you know, they might be kind of stuck right there. And you know, same if there are other faith traditions like that. Some Christians do believe you can argue with God and question God to his face, and that's okay, right? And that's part of your relationship. And that actually brings up the client experience I wanted to share, which was a deeply spiritual experience for both of us. My client, Shantaine, she lost her son. They had been estranged, and then he died of an illness that she wasn't really aware of because they had been estranged. So one of the things we did in our work together was figure out what she never got to say to her son and start articulating those things out loud. And all people have things they need to say to each other, one of which is, I apologize. One of which is, I forgive you. Some others are, thank you, I love you, and goodbye. So I help people say that to their loved ones, whether they're present or not. What we discovered as she was saying those things to her son was that she was angry with God. And I said, well, maybe you need to forgive God. And her experience as a Christian was, I'm not entitled to forgive God, right? Like the thought of having that kind of a conversation with God never occurred to her. And I encouraged her to give it a try. So if you can imagine, that was an amazing spiritual experience for both of us as she stepped out and started relating to her God in a new way. And think about it, opened up a whole new channel of conversation, authenticity, vulnerability with in her spirituality. So that was a really, that was one of those experiences I was truly honored to be a part of, you know, because that was really life-changing for her in her spirituality specifically.
And it speaks to one of the tenets that we have here that has just been inducted into our regular tenets about checking our assumptions. Check yourself before you correct yourself. There's sometimes that, where did I get this idea that I can't question God? Or where did I get this idea that I can't, whatever, XYZ, right? And so this is beautiful. This is great. I love that. I want to open it up to anybody who has questions or comments for Jinnie. Because as you can tell, I could just hog her to myself forever. Giovanni says, forgiving God, what a beautiful concept. I deeply love it. It's great. Okay, Gio, you have a
if we're mad at God, that needs to be part of how that would be reconciled, right? And I just want to point out one thing about the work I do. The grief recovery method is purposefully secular and non-spiritual for just that reason. Because if you're mad at God and you try to go to a scripture-based or spiritual-based healing program, that's not going to resonate for you if you're mad and questioning, right? So we very purposefully do not wrap ours in any faith tradition. Now, I'm happy to talk about the faith with the person I'm with when they want to, but it's not like a requirement to tap into the healing. I feel really strongly about that. I love that choice they made.
That's awesome. Gio, what you got?
Well, I'm in love with Jinnie. I'm like, wow, you're a beautiful human being, and you have brought you have navigated certain corners in the conversation that I thought that have been beautiful. Truly just beautiful how you have navigated me into this possibility of it all, of really looking at where am I putting in the pressure cook something in underneath the umbrella of time heals things. And I love that you said time doesn't heal anything. Maybe it helps things evolve, but not heal. And I think that has pierced something within me for me to look. And the other thing I want to say, grief coach for women, I'm going to leave a kind seed to include men, because you're a beautiful human being, and I think that with your eloquence and with your commitment, we men need it, and a lot more than one might think, given that our inherited models for relationship is not to talk.
Yes.
And so I don't have a question, Jinnie. I just wanted to appreciate you for being here, for coming here.
Thank you so much, Gio. I love you right back. And I need to make that change. I have that conversation periodically about why just women. And I encourage you men who think this is valuable to support your brothers to step into it too. I mean, part of it is just that women tend to take up this kind of work a little more easily, but I definitely have a heart for men that are hurting. Everyone on this earth is hurting. There's not one of us that isn't carrying a backlog of grief. So I would be thrilled to support as many people as want to heal that backlog and get back to their full expression and full performance. So thank you for saying so, Gio.
Thank you, Gio. Sorrel, you have something?
Yes, I do. Jinnie, thank you for coming back. And, ditto to everything that Gio just said. I love you. I love this conversation. And what's there for me to ask is there such a thing as sweet grief? Like the kind of grief I feel, I don't know if it's grief, but it's connected to my love, say, for my mother, or my love for a family member, my love for a friend. Like I'm longing for that person, or my love for my country. I'm longing to be home. I'm missing you. There's something sweet about that.
Yeah.
So what's the connection between grief and love?
Such a rich question. And part of my answer is I think we all know the answer in our heart, but thank you for asking, and I'm gonna feel free to articulate what I think the answer is. I agree with you. I love that term, sweet grief. That's wonderful. It reminds me of bittersweet, but I think it's got a nuance about it. My husband and I are taking a class about C.S. Lewis right now, and he wrote a book called Surprised by Joy. And he had glimpses of just what you're talking about, Sorrel. Like he didn't even know what he was missing, but he just knew there was something different he was missing. Like you said, whether it was a far off place or like a love that he hadn't met yet, he had that kind of experience. So he calls it joy, but I think sweet grief is a better name for it. Here's what I think. I think that all of our grief has a potential to be sweet, but when we're in the throes of the pain that comes with it, we can't experience that way. All we feel is the pain. So I'm gonna share a compare and contrast that I use a lot of times to explain the difference of what I'm talking about. So the word closure, you all are familiar with the word closure, right? That's kind of what our society teaches us. Get closure and then slam that door, walk away, don't go back, right? Like as though it's a one and done. And what I think we want is what we at the Grief Recovery Method call completion, which is not a big, heavy wooden door with a ton of iron shackles keeping it closed that I can't even look at for fear I'm going to break down. I want that glass revolving door where I can tap into those memories anytime I want to without getting sucked into the spiral of grief, right? Like I want to enjoy my memories, happy, sad, or otherwise, and then be able to get on with my day. Like I want to access those whenever I want. Like Monica, don't you want to think of your dad and his perfect purposeful gait anytime you want, and then be able to go to the next meeting and the next lunch and the next whatever without needing to go in the fetal position? So
Right.
I think when you have that healing, that's when the grief can become sweet. It doesn't get you stuck.
Mhm.
So we want to get rid of those hurt feelings so that we have access to everything else. Sorrel, I'd love to know what you think about that.
Wow, it's not what I think about it. It's more like what your speaking generated with me. And what it generated is this statement: grief is a gift. For on the other side of grief is exactly what I'm looking for. It could be love, it could be power, it could be energy, it could be joy.
Could be
So
freedom.
the revolving door you're speaking of, I love it. It's like I can now look for opportunities to go through the revolving door and emerge out the other side.
Yes. Yes. Happy
what's on
memories
the
are
other
back
side.
there.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
good memories are back there. Lessons learned are back there. You know, beautiful visual memories you want to have. They're all in there. And so, yeah, I love that. In fact, I'd like to tie it back to what Monica said right before we went into the Q&A, the check yourself. I think one of the gifts that grief gives us spiritually is a chance to reevaluate, right? Like whatever the loss or the change or the ending was, by definition, there's some new stuff ahead of you. And so talk about that built-in time along our lives to check ourselves, check our assumptions, decide if we're on the right path. You know, one of the things that can come out of grief is, holy cow, I don't have as much time as I thought, right? Or holy cow, I need to figure out how to relate with people in a way that's more healthy and supportive for me. And we might change our behaviors. We might change our path in life. We might change how we invest our time and attention because we realize we have something to get done and time is not unlimited. I mean, check yourself. I think grief is a way to do that. Yeah.
Yes, that's lovely. It's a great humbling experience, but also very expansive, because Lord have mercy. If we didn't feel it so deeply on the lows, we wouldn't be available for the highs.
Yes.
I love that you've shared with us, Jinnie, today. What were you
my
gonna say?
pleasure.
Felt like
Thank
it was
you. Well, I just thought of that old saying that we coaches say and hear a lot, which is you can't have the breakthrough without the breakdown, right? Like if we didn't have those grief opportunities to check ourselves, we might never change anything. We might never grow. So it's all part of the big picture.
Well, I appreciate you being here with us and opening this dialogue with us. I agree with you, Giovanni. Jinnie is a rock star. And I'm hugging everybody here. We all have something that we are grieving, or someone that we are grieving, a past that didn't turn out the way that you envisioned, or a future that perhaps you now no longer have access to. But there are other futures that you do have access to, and there are ways to tell the story of that past so that it can move you forward to it. Thank you so much for everybody. And remember our tenets here in the Daily Huddle. We're getting close to having our very own 10 commandments. We're this close. We're 2 of them away.
That's right.
Love generously, laugh out loud, eat more plant-based, as Giovanni says, eat more trees. I love that he says that. Give of yourself, your talent, your energy, your attention. Move. You know, we want you to shake your little tail feather. And sleep. Get yourself at least 7 hours of sleep per night. Stress less. And one of the ways that you can stress less is to check yourself before you wreck yourself. Always confront your assumptions. Thank you, everybody, for being with us today. Have a great rest of your week.
Thanks, y'all. Take care.